Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of Unwinding Anxiety. New science shows how to break the cycles of worry and fear to heal your mind. By Judson Brewer. Is your anxiety level between 1 and 10? Take a page from Judson Brewer's book if you scored high on this assessment. Anxiety is at an all-time high due to the pandemic and the excessive demands of modern life, making this an ideal time for it. Anxiety is examined as both a habit and an addiction in Unwinding Anxiety. We're shown how to harness the power of rewards, awareness, mindfulness, and empathy by providing an easy-to-follow approach to reducing anxiety. Anxiety may be a new phenomenon for you, or it may have been brought on by an international pandemic. Is it possible that you've been plagued by anxiety your entire life? Self-sabotaging behaviors are likely to be familiar to you regardless of how long you've had a companion. Maybe you eat a lot of chocolate, smoke another cigarette, or put off your work for a few more days? Perhaps you've already had your second glass of wine, or you've been checking the news or Facebook incessantly. Even though you are aware that these coping mechanisms are harmful, you are unable to break the cycle. Psychiatrist Judd Brewer MD PhD enters the scene. Brown University Associate Professor and expert in the field of addiction. Anxiety-relieving tips and techniques abound in his best-selling book Unwinding Anxiety, which combines cutting-edge scientific research with anecdotes from the author's own life. We'll take a look at how anxiety develops into a habit. Learn how to equip yourself and gear up for a life free of today's mental plague and live it to its fullest potential by taking this course. What happens when anxiety turns into a lifelong problem? Approximately 264 million people in the world suffered from a diagnosable anxiety disorder prior to the introduction of COVID-19. After COVID, things have only gotten worse. A study conducted in the United States in April 2020 found that 13.6% of respondents reported severe psychological distress, a 250% increase from 2018. There are millions of us who can identify with these numbers, but we don't realize that anxiety is an addictive habit. In any case, Brewer is on hand to assist. In Unwinding Anxiety, we learn how to map our habit loops and understand our brains in order to alter them. Awareness, curiosity, and self-compassion are the keys to breaking free from destructive habits once and for all. Brewer's advice works, so don't worry about it. In his clinical programs from Yale and Brown University, he uses apps to help us break our bad habits. In people with generalized anxiety disorder, there was a 40% decrease in craving-related eating and a 63% decrease in anxiety. Unfortunately, anxiety, according to Brewer, is a little bit like pornography. It's difficult to define, but once you see it, it's easy to identify. Furthermore, we are unable to see the anxiety that is plaguing us. It's possible that we go to bed worried and carry that worry with us into the next day. Or perhaps a panic attack in the middle of the night brings it on without warning. When we're anxious, we may feel as if we can't breathe, or we may feel as if we're having a panic attack. Anxiety can be mild or severe. We may obsess over a particular topic or idea. Worry spreads like wildfire when we find something trivial to worry about. It's a sticky wicket to diagnose, says Brewer, because it shows up in so many forms and intensity levels. To make matters worse, we all have different coping mechanisms that, while beneficial at one point in time, may have turned out to be particularly counterproductive in the present. Why do we get so nervous in the modern world? Anxiety can be broken down into a simple formula. Anxiety is a combination of fear and uncertainty. Since the Stone Ages, fear has been an evolutionary advantage because it helps us survive. As a result of this, we learn to respond to triggers in a certain way. Our brains have been using reward-based learning for centuries. The more rewarding the outcome, the more it is etched into the brain and the stronger the habit becomes. As a result, we might imagine something like this. To activate, press the trigger button. Run in the opposite direction, and do it quickly. Survival is the outcome/reward. Because survival is a substantial reward, we've learned to repeat this behavior over and over again. To put it another way, trigger, the sight of delectable fare. Eat a lot of delicious food. As a reward, you'll feel better. While the loop is different, it is the same in both cases. Behavior triggered by the trigger. Repeat the process. As long as there is a positive outcome, the more deeply it is ingrained in our brains, and the more difficult it becomes to break. PFC, prefrontal cortex, developed on top of our older brain over time, allowing us to think and make decisions. When we rely on the PFC's well-intentioned but inexperienced predictions, we can better prepare for what lies ahead. Old brain and younger PFC work well together for our survival and entrenchment of habitual behaviors that lead into rewards. Routines free up the prefrontal cortex, PFC, of our brain so that it can focus on the exploration of novel information. As cool as it may sound, there is a catch. Accurate information is required for our PFC to make sound predictions and achieve successful outcomes. However, if we don't have enough information to accurately predict the outcome of a situation, we're in trouble. The more what-if scenarios there are in the future, the more our PFC cranks out. All too often, we find ourselves in situations where we don't know the outcome. Consider COVID-19. Our brains have a big heap of badness to process if we don't have accurate information from our past experiences and aren't bombarded with frightening details, not to mention fake news. In addition, it causes our PFC to go into overdrive, poring over countless what-ifs. Logic and rational thought don't mix well with anxiety. Uncertainty feeds anxiety, and our PFCs get out of hand when there's too much of it. Fear and its associated physiological responses are activated in our brains and nervous systems. As humans, we are incapable of distinguishing between real danger and imagined threats. As a result, we resort to addictive behaviors in an effort to alleviate our anxiety. As a result of our brain wiring being a little out of whack, the modern world happily plays on our addiction. If you think about the like reaction on Facebook, you can see how well our environment does at hooking us into addiction with both intermittent and immediate reinforcement, clicking a button to buy must-have shoes with next-day delivery. Even in our darkest moments of loneliness, there is always a quick fix. This can be in the form of an online game, an online dating site, an endless stream of news, or a new appliance appearing because algorithms have determined that you shop at a particular website specifically. Modern life is killing us because it creates a never-ending stream of addictive experiences, according to Brewer. Yes, for everyone. Brewer reminds us that continued use despite adverse consequences is the definition of addiction. People often associate use with cigarettes or alcohol, but it extends far beyond this. Although it can lead to high blood sugar and weight gain, we eat too much chocolate. Despite the negative consequences, we may still long for a lost love. We could spend hours playing computer games or scrolling through news feeds on our smartphones. Because our brains are wired for this type of motivational learning, we tend to do more of what makes us happy and less of what makes us unhappy. Then there's this, and here's why. Brewer provides us with a fresh perspective on anxiety. Is it possible that it's become a habit? And it's one that's easy to get sucked into. As a result, it is time for a counterattack. The key to working with your mind is to first gain an understanding of how it functions. Hack our brains now. Burying or over-intellectualizing anxiety is counterproductive. Where should we begin? Brewer argues that understanding how our brains function is the first step. It can be helpful to know that our PFC is overreacting because it lacks accurate information to work with. We can hack our brains if we understand how they work. Take note of what happens when you start to feel anxious or panicked, so that you can learn from it. Our brains can be hacked if we can figure out how to use loops. As an illustration, let's take a look at an actual situation. An alcoholic patient of Dr. Brewer's worked out how one of his loops worked. Anxiety at the end of the day sparked the behavior of drinking. As a result, I became disoriented, numb, and intoxicated. Many alcoholics seek numbness as a result. Even though it's bad for you, it's a reward. Procrastination is a growing problem, and this can be applied to it. Anxiety from seeing how much work there is to do in the morning could be a possible trigger. People who procrastinate do so in order to avoid doing something they find unpleasant. We gain more control and confidence in our ability to make a change when we become aware of our habitual patterns. The first step is to identify all the habit loops that are connected to our anxiety. But first, a word of caution. We need to come up with new ways of dealing with the challenges that face us. How many times have you tried to break a bad habit and failed? Habit loops may have become more apparent to you. The tendency is to fall back on tried and true methods of resolving the issue. The end result is failure, which is not surprising. The temptation to go back to our old ways is strong. In order to break out of our cycles, we often rely on 3 tried and true methods. Willpower, substitution, and priming our environment are all examples of these. The PFC works well with the older parts of the brain. Because the PFC is one of the brain's newest and weakest members, the PFC tends to go offline when we are under stress. It doesn't take long for self-control to develop because it is dependent on the prefrontal cortex's logical abilities. However, if we try to replace an old habit loop, like smoking cigarettes with candy, this doesn't necessarily change the loop. Our options are limited. The brain's reward value system can be modernized. As part of this process, we must replace old and unhelpful habits with new ones that are actually beneficial. Disillusioned? Then get ready. With honesty and openness, we are able to assess the real benefits of our anxiety-based behaviors. As a result, we must decide if the short-term benefits outweigh the risks. An old-fashioned reward-based behavior is depicted in this example. When you get home from a long day at the office, all you want to do is open a bag of chips and watch TV. When most of the chips have been consumed, you begin to feel ill. Is there something strange going on inside your head? Reward value is what Brewer refers to. Relaxation was the goal here, and that meant a bag of chips and a seat in front of the TV. The orbitofrontal cortex helps our brains figure out the value of a reward, OFC. This part of the brain combines emotional, sensory, and previous behavioral information into chunks, which helps to activate an automatic, habitual response. The question is, how do we make this better? Instead of concentrating on the actions themselves, we should pay attention to how we feel when we receive the rewards for those actions. It's important to be aware of the value of the reward in the here and now, according to Brewer. Reward-based education relies on students' awareness. New information is required by our brains in order to recognize that the value we previously assigned to a behavior is no longer valid. As a result, we must make a change by paying attention to how our bodies feel after consuming an excessive amount of potato chips. The same is true of smoking. An example of this reward value could be an old Marlboro Man ad, showing him smoking with the hipsters and reveling in his rebelliousness. It wasn't until a woman brought curiosity and awareness to her in-the-moment smoking experience that she updated her old reward value of smoking. A light bulb went off in her head, and she began to realize that the cigarette smells and tastes like chemicals. Yuck. It is, however, impossible for us to change this reward value until we pay attention to that exact moment. We need to understand that the reward value encoded in our brains differs from the current reward value. As a result of this realization, a useful word comes to the forefront: disenchantment. When you're bored with the behavior you're observing, it's less interesting. You'll remember this the next time you reach for the potato chips or the cigarettes because you'll be more aware of how bad they make you feel. You've begun hacking your brain by realizing this disenchantment. People who suffer from anxiety and panic attacks are often unable to live their lives to the fullest. A helpful app can assist us in mapping our anxiety loops, and it is in our best interest to do so. Keeping track of our loops, and asking ourselves if the reward value is as high as we've been led to believe, is an ongoing process. You'll likely begin to notice the benefits and side effects you experience as a result of your habit and come to the conclusion that it isn't all it's cracked up to be. So, what do we do next? Willpower is not always helpful, and substituting behaviors can perpetuate our anxiety loops. We understand this. This is where the importance of mindful awareness comes into play. We must learn to cultivate mindful awareness in order to break out of our ruts. Develop a sense of wonder, curiosity, and compassion for yourself. Awareness is the first step. We can break the cycle of anxiety by becoming more aware of how we feel and how that relates to our habits. Being aware, on the other hand, does not necessitate a trip down the rabbit hole that is why. We're prone to thinking that if we can figure out why we're anxious, our anxiety will go away. Getting anxious and trying to figure out what's causing it is a vicious cycle that we're all familiar with. Connecting with our feelings and sensations in the moment is our primary responsibility. Brewer advises taking 3 deep breaths and saying, "Why doesn't matter," 3 times on each exhalation when we notice a why habit loop developing. So, if the why is irrelevant, what is? What's the best way to find out? Instead of resorting to unhealthy habits to numb our anxiety, cultivating a curious awareness allows us to stay present with it. Think about the possibility of cultivating a kind and curious awareness of unpleasant sensations and feelings. It is possible to alleviate our anxiety without actually fixing the situation in this case. As a way of practicing mindful awareness and curiosity, RAIN is an excellent example. R stands for recognize what's going on right now. As long as you don't try to change it, you're good. I stands for curiously investigating your feelings, thoughts, and sensations, while N stands for taking note of what's taking place in your experience. Brewer's attention is drawn to the letter N. At any time of day, we have the ability to quickly complete this task. Feeling physical sensations and thinking are 2 additional senses that you can use in addition to your 5. Recognize which of these is in control at any given time. This can assist us in gaining a better understanding of our personal habit cycles. This is a quick exercise that should be repeated frequently. Self-compassion is essential as we untangle ourselves from our habitual patterns of self-criticism. A growth mindset and a sense of humor will help you break free of your chip-eating compulsion in the long run. Growth mindset is practice self-compassion as we learn from mindset and black box thinking. Keep in mind that you won't always get things right, so don't be too hard on yourself. As long as you're open to new possibilities, you'll be able to adapt to them. In the end, anxiety sobriety is a term we've never heard of before, but it's something we can all identify with. Most of us can't imagine a tomorrow free of anxiety. There is a good chance that our anxiety addiction and the self-defeating patterns it causes may be in need of some attention. Using Judson Brewer's method, we can identify our stale patterns of behavior, hack our brains to improve our wiring, and hone our superpowers of awareness, curiosity, and kindness. These superpowers are within our grasp, and they have the potential to significantly improve our moods. Worrying doesn't take away tomorrow's problems, says musician Randy Armstrong. It robs us of today's tranquility, she says. Admitting that you have an issue is the first step toward recovery, so now is the perfect time to address anxiety addiction. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.